architectural knowledge, especially architectural knowledge in the area of e-government. To give you a little bit of my background, I am with ArchiXL. We are a Dutch IT architecture, enterprise architecture consultancy, and we are active in a couple of areas. Some of them in the, let's say, more commercial areas, retail, financial institutions, but we're especially active in the public and semi-public sector, local government, central government, education, and that's also the area that I will show you some examples from to illustrate the way in which we apply Semantic Media Wiki to some very concrete problems that we encounter in practice. So what I'd like to talk about today is, well, let me start with a little bit of a background on what is e-government, so that we all have the same impression on the topic that I'm talking about. I'll show you what sort of architectural knowledge you encounter if you look at the Dutch e-government initiatives that are currently running. And then I'll show you how we use Semantic Media Wiki to manage that, and especially one of the more recent things that we are working on is connecting different semantic wikis, semantic media wikis, in order to enable reusing architectural knowledge from one environment in another. And I will show a demo of that. And I apologize beforehand because as soon as we get to the demo, things will be in Dutch, but I will translate on the fly. For us, yes. I don't know for Yuri, but so if we're talking about e-government, what are we talking about? Well, it's pretty much goal-driven. It's driven from the view that the customers of the government, the citizens, the businesses, should experience a reduction in the administrative burdens that the government applies to them, and there should be better service provision. And the means that government agencies have to establish this is basically work together, align business processes, and use each other's information. And this sounds quite easy, but this has tremendous impact on business processes, the information landscape, and even the technology that's being used. So to give you an example of what sort of things you encounter if you go in this direction, suppose you want to renovate and extend your house. This means you need a permit. It's quite a big operation. You might need to fell some trees. So you also need a permit for that. It's even bigger. You also need to demolish part of the building that's currently there. So you're also going to need a permit for that. At least that was the case up until about 2 years ago. So you would have this plan. You want to achieve something. And you had to go to all these government agencies to get all the right permits. You had to have a building permit, you had to have a tree felling permit, you had to have a demolition permit. It's not entirely clear which government agency is responsible for providing you with which type of permit. You can look that up, of course, but you have to physically shop by different agencies to get the permission that you need. Now, some 2 years ago, this changed. The government introduced the environmental permit, and now you have, let's say, a one-stop shop. You have one government that you can go to that can provide you with the permit, and even if different agencies are involved, it's basically a matter of the government itself figuring out which agency is responsible for providing which part of the permit. So there are different means of interacting with e-government. I'm going to skip this for the moment because what I want to talk about is the architecture behind this. If you look at the Dutch e-government, there's a whole family of reference architectures. Now, what do these architectures contain? If you look at the definition of architecture in ISO 4210, it says it's the fundamental organization of a system. Here, the government as a whole is a system, embodied in components, relationships, and the principles guiding its design and evolution. So what you would encounter in each of these reference architectures is, amongst others, many principles that are being applied to the evolution of the e-government. Now what you see here is that we have something called the Dutch government reference architecture, which is government-wide. It's applicable government-wide. And then per domain, for the municipalities, for the civil service, for provinces, education, water control boards, there are domain-specific reference architectures. To give you an example of the type of principles that you encounter here, could be, there's a principle called no wrong door, which is basically what I just showed you by means of this environmental permit. I should just be able to go to the government and get what I need. So I should be pointed in the right direction. There's a more technical principle that says single request, multiple use of data. So once I have provided my information to the government, if I gave it to the municipality, I go to the province should know about me because the government knows about me, right? And that's the type of statements that you would find at the very upper level of the Dutch government reference architecture. All these reference architectures, pretty much all of them that I just showed you, have now been put in semantic media wikis. So there is a NORA semantic media wiki for the Dutch government reference architecture. There's a Petra wiki for the provinces reference architecture. There's a ROSA wiki for the education sector reference architecture, and so on and so forth. And this would be a page that you encounter in this case, the NORA wiki. This is the same principle that I just put on the slide, no wrong door. And what you see here is all sorts of properties that this principle has. So it has an ID, it has a statement, it has a rationale which explains why the principle is there. It has implications which describe what it actually means to comply to this principle, and it goes on a bit beyond that. Now these principles and other statements that you find in this reference architecture, they have been structured. So what you see here is, and here it becomes Dutch, but unfortunately I have also some English statement here as well. So what you see here is basically a chain of statements. It starts with drivers at the very top left. It goes to goals, to principles, to requirements, and it's basically a further refinement each time of the type of statement, decision that you want to apply to your architecture. And what these arrows mean is that, in this case, requirements realize principles, principles realize goals. So you see sort of a tree crop up there. Forget about the other part, by the way. So what we did is behind these pages of principles in the NORA wiki, we have this structure. The pages are related to each other according to what you see here. Now there are also, let's say, core attributes, the properties that you encounter on the page. I won't go into detail here, I just showed you a bit. You can imagine anything if you talk about what type of information you want to record for this type of principles and statements. What we are currently working on is not necessarily codifying these principles in a single wiki, because we've been doing that for a couple of years now, and it has shown that it has added value in terms of findability, in terms of reusability in projects. But what is actually the thing that we're looking into now is, if you look back at the picture I just showed you about these different reference architectures, like I said, it's a whole family. But there are obviously, they're not drawn here, but there are obviously connections between each of these reference architectures. So here you have the Dutch government reference architecture, a government-wide reference architecture that is being reused and refined in the context of provinces, of water control boards, of education. So what you encounter here is that once the government, the Dutch government reference architecture evolves, principles change, principles may be added, society doesn't stand still. So even if we have good ideas now, in a couple of years from now, we might want to do things a little bit differently. That will be reflected in Nora in this case. Currently, there is no real solid mechanism for the architects of the other architectures here to be informed about that. So they have to sort of proactively monitor the evolution of Nora themselves, even though they know that parts of their architecture are dependent on certain parts of the Nora. And there's another question that you would like to answer, to have an answer to, which is, given all these principles like no wrong door that we just saw that are part of the Nora, what does that actually mean if you go look at municipalities, if you go and have a look at the education field? How is this principle no wrong door being implemented there? So these are two questions that have to do with the boundary between these different architectures. So what we would like to be able to is to connect them, even though they are in different environments, even though they are being maintained under different authorities. So what we do is this. We use inter-wiki links. So from within one of the Nora daughters, the Rosa, the Gemma, the Petra, all of the domain-specific reference architectures I showed, we have inter-wiki links to the semantic wiki that contains the Nora architecture. And by making these links between these different environments explicit, we are able to use remote queries to get answers to the questions that I just asked. How are these Nora principles being applied in practice? And if things changes, how am I going to be updated if I am working in this environment here? So what we do is, here you see the same structure that you just saw with the different types of statements that realize each other. So here we have derived principles that realize basic principles in Nora. Here we have one of the wikis that contain, in this case, the reference architecture for the education domain. What we do there is we include what we call a proxy. We include part of the Nora that we want to link the education architecture to. And then, within the context of this link, we provide a domain-specific refinement. So we explain how we are going to, what we are going to do with this statement that says no wrong door. And we may even have other statements and other principles that are only valid within the context of education, that are a further realization of this principle of no wrong door. So this is the basic structure that we use. This is not too hard to set up, by the way. You can just use inter-wiki links from within any wiki page. You have to register the inter-wiki prefix, and you can do this. Now, one of the things that you don't want to do is have a manual maintenance of these proxies here. Because if things change here, you don't want to manually change them there. You have the same problem then. You just move the problem from following the evolution of the architecture to following the evolution of individual pages. But you want to have a single point you can maintain this. So we built a dashboard for that. And let me just quickly jump to one of our wikis. So this is the wiki of the Ministry of Education that contains the education reference architecture. And what you see here is the proxy for this principle, no wrong door. It has information that has been taken directly from the Nora Online wiki. You can find that here. But what's more important is that it has a place to record the local refinement. So what it says here on top, it says local refinement, explanation, applicable domain, type of relation with Nora, and realizes, which may be again links to other pages that contain principles that are being realized by this principle. And what you see here is that the type of relation with Nora is comply. That's what we assume. As soon as you say there's a link between my architecture and the other one, we assume that means that you comply. Of course, that might not be the case. So if you edit this page, you are greeted by a semantic form. And here you can, among other things, fill out the type of relation. So one of the principles that everything adheres to is the principle of comply or explain, which means if you don't comply, you better have a good reason for it. So the reason, you can record it here. You can record in the explanation field why in this case it's impossible or only partly possible to adhere to the principle of no wrong door. Now, like I said, we constructed a dashboard that helps you to maintain these inter-wiki links, these proxies. That's what you see here. We are still in the education semantic wiki, but the information you see here is taken from the Nora wiki. So the one that in the picture was on the very top. And it reconstructs the whole tree, or actually the I should say the directed acyclic graph, because some of the statements may occur under several top statements here. It reconstructs it, it displays it as a tree, and it gives you the option to just fill out for which ones you want to construct a proxy. So what it says here on top is Nora statements. That's the things you find here in this column. It says link. Is there a link already? Have we established a link from within our architecture to this principle from the Nora architecture? There's an indication of the state. So if it hasn't been linked yet, you will find a red cross and it says hasn't been linked. If it has been linked, you will find a green check mark, and in this case it says up to date. So there have not been any changes within the Nora since the time that we made this connection. And here you have another column that tells you something about the underlying statements, because if I press here on the expand button, you can see that in the same structure that I just described, there are other finer grained statements that are being connected to, in this case, the principle of reliability. That's what it says here. So here are several things you should take into account in order to realize reliability. Now, what can happen is that things in the Nora change. This is the place where you see that. So if I go down a bit, what you see here is that there is a principle, accessibility, for which the underlying statements have a new version. And if I open this further, this is the one where that happens. So here it says there is a new version. Do you want to update? And if I look here, it gives me an overview of, on the left-hand side, the current status of the principle in the Nora. On the right-hand side, the current status of this principle, the proxy, in our own wiki. And in this case, only the version has changed. So I made a dummy edit in order for this to show it to you. But suppose that something in the rationale changes, or there may be changes in the structure of the principle, so that there are other realizations. You want to be able to import them into your own wiki, but not before you have been able to do an impact analysis. Because if things changes on this level, they might impact a large part of your own architecture. You want to be able to assess what it means before you go down here and say, okay, update. So this enables you as an architect of, in this case, the education architecture, to keep being notified and keep up to date with the evolution of one of the architectures that you have based your own architecture upon. Now the other way around, and now I jump to the Nora wiki, you also want to know, like I said, how are my principles being applied in practice? So here we do it the other way around, and we have remote queries that we use here And what you see here is on the left-hand side, one of the NORA principles. It says use the nationwide available building blocks. And here on the right-hand side, it says this is being realized in ROSA by a principle that says in the education field, we share an ICT infrastructure. Now you can imagine that this goes further, that there are finer grained decisions that further shape what this shared ICT infrastructure looks like. But this is basically the way in which you want to see how your principles are being applied in other environments. Now here's a different view that has to do with the way in which these proxies are further refined. As you can see, that's something we still have to do. So now we see only comply relations and none of the explanations have been filled out yet. This is likely to change in the very near future when we actually start to assess these relations between the education architecture and the government-wide architecture further. So this is what I wanted to show. Very, let's say, state of the art, because we haven't even been able to fill out everything here. But I hope was an interesting thing to see how we are applying this in practice. And if any of you have any ideas on let's say, shaping these inter-wiki links and making them semantic and what we can do with it even more, it's a topic that I'm very interested in. So I would like to hear your remarks on that as well. Thank you. Yuri.
I have a question. It's maybe more about the methodology of what you do. So you have this linkage between the general principle and how they practically are realized, are implemented. I think that in this context, in context of government, it's way better to have some kind of a confirmation or agreement that it's really the case that this principle is realized by this action.
Yeah, I understand what you say, but there's, let's say, a difficulty there in that every government agency has its own authority to decide how they want to do things. Now, obviously, this government reference architecture is not something that's being applied top-down. So it's not something that's being designed without involvement of the other agencies. Actually, it's the other way around. Everyone is involved in coming up with the, let's say, the government-wide principles. And then, indeed, it is up to each of the domains to indicate how they use it, whether they comply or whether they don't comply. There may be good reasons not to comply. It's not a big deal as long as you are aware of this divergence from the general principle, and as long as you are able to explain why you can't or won't comply in that case.
I mean that the question of personal responsibility and involvement in such things. I agree that this principle is related to this presentation.
Yeah.
And probably the government, I don't know what are the government that in the Russian government are not as motivated to make it not formal, but
Mm-hmm.
Maybe we have to take the rest of the discussion offline because I think we are at the end of the session already.
Okay.
So thank you again for now, and there will be time. I have a few quick announcements to make about what's going to happen next. Maybe the local organizers can also support me in some of that. First quick remark. If you are giving a talk or have given a talk, upload your slide to the wiki. I trust that everybody who is able to give the talk here knows how to do that and has no problems doing it by himself. Actually, we also have a template where you can register the slide semantically, but if you don't manage to find out how, it's still okay.